Well, I'm under a strict time crunch, and usually it's dangerous to give me a microphone, but I'm not going to introduce too much of them other than their bios are in the report here, but bring to the stage Representative Anna Novak and Representative David Richter, and then Mr. Bogart is going to fill in for Mr. Daren Kurle on the education side of things. Did you dare sit by me, Anna? Anna was nervous. She had to have the questions in advance, but little does she know I like to do a little ad-libbing and add things.
Oh, good.
So it'll be entertaining, and since she's to my left, she's going to get picked on the most, probably.
Do you want to switch?
So, first question, of course, we're dealing specific with schools on a lot of these things. So, right now, Measure 4 is the big one, and Leslie's kind of spoke a little bit about that, and Senator Beckedahl gave a good speech on that, and that's why we're short on time. But with that being said, you're welcome. Brad actually used to be a neighbor of mine way back when I was little. Man, that was a long time ago. Anyway, so with Measure 4, how do you foresee Measure 4 impacting rural school districts like those in North Dakota where resources for construction and maintenance are often limited? Mind you, we're the only entity in this measure that can assess taxes. Who do you want?
Do you want to start first? Okay. Can you guys hear me? This is on? Okay. So, Measure 4, I think Senator Beckedahl did a really great job as to illustrating the negative impacts that it's going to have for the entire state, but rural North Dakota is going to be impacted greater than any other part of the state. We already have issues with aging buildings and infrastructure, and so it's during the school funding task force, which I served on in the interim, Jeff Simon and the School Construction Coalition did a really good job they did homework and they brought pictures to us of the different schools that are in disrepair across the state. And you know, the smaller rural schools, they have a difficult time finding funds to pay their regular bills, you know, and for salaries for their teachers. And I think that if this measure passes, it's going to impact the rural schools more than the larger towns, and that doesn't even begin to touch the problems that it's going to create when trying to pass a school bond referendum to repair the buildings.
I think every school district, well, not every school district, some school districts don't have a building fund. So when you look at how schools fund how they do their repairs, most school districts have a building fund which is up to 10 mills that's dedicated to and can only be used on fixing up their buildings. So Measure 4 freezes at the 2024 level. So there's no increase. The state will pick up that mill, but if you're one of those school districts that this year ended up with 5 mills, that's what you get in perpetuity with no increase, no inflation, no nothing. That's what you get from the state. If you're one of those districts that's at 10 mills, then you're doing okay. There's one school district in the state, a very large school district, that never has to go to a bond issue or a referendum because they have a 20 mil building fund, and I can't remember, it's $600 million of taxable valuation. So they don't even need to go to a vote. So the state will be paying them that amount of money, and will be paying the small schools that little bit of money that they use for their general maintenance. How do you go? Some of the schools have to save up in that building fund for 2-3 years just to replace a boiler system or just to replace this, because what they can generate off of that is very little. And now we're going to freeze it. The other part of Measure 4 is that when I look at Northwest North Dakota, I'm from Williston, most of the schools in Northwest North Dakota have passed bond and have built new schools or are building new schools. So the taxpayers in those communities still have to pay for those schools. Mm-hmm. It's the schools that haven't passed a referendum, and there's one school that's looking at $160 million worth of building projects that, how are they going to pay for that? There's nothing in Measure 4 that says the state will pick it up. It says, it freezes it at this. That's going to have to be a legislative decision. Is the legislature going to pick that up? And as Anna mentioned on the task force, I think there were estimated somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million of deferred maintenance alone in the K-12 system in North Dakota. So that's not going to come from local anymore. It's going to have to come from the state. But again, there's nothing in Measure 4 that says the state has to pay for it. It simply says we replace the mills that you already have. And 5 years from now, 6 years from now, you know, if inflation keeps going the way it's going, what you're getting isn't going to be enough to cover it.
So Brett, maybe you could highlight as part of the school construction task force, the number of districts with aging buildings that are across the state and the needs that you're seeing as a result of failed multiple referendums.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I worked with the School Construction Coalition, Funding Coalition, and we did a survey which 110 of the 170 roughly school districts responded to, and every school district has some capital need in regards to infrastructure, whether it's maintenance, replacing a boiler, upgrading windows, or new buildings altogether. I mean, some of the schools we actually have, there was one school district, I'm not going to name names of school districts to make them feel bad, but one district actually has part of their building was recently condemned. That's the condition of some of the buildings in rural North Dakota. They haven't been able to pass, they've actually gone to two bond votes and had them both fail. And so when you're dealing, because the increase necessary, they don't have the dollars, they don't have that taxable base in regards to like some of our urban communities, and so that's where Measure 4 is really going to hurt those rural communities, because they don't have that tax base that even though the state's going to replace it, they're not even able to maintain what they have right now, and that's a challenge, and it's a challenge to get that across, you know, for people to recognize that we've got to make those types of investments in buildings. And the facility assessments and the information that we received, honestly, it was actually kind of mind-blowing even for me growing up in the rural part of the state.
I just asked for permission to change the subject a little bit. On Measure 4, there's one thing about school funding. We always say that it's per pupil is $11,000. It's state and local funding. The state has said the state and local funding shall be $11,000. And so there's really three funding sources that go into that $11,000. One is your local property tax, one is your state aid, and the other one is you're in lieu of property tax. And so in lieu of property tax are things like gross production tax, there's oil conversion, mobile homes, there's flood relief. All of those things are part of in lieu of. So if Measure 4 passes, we replace your state, your local revenue. We don't replace the GPT or the in lieu of. So what you end up doing is in schools that have high in lieu of, they will receive less money from the state, and it will still be a very large local share that's paying for that school district. And some school districts that have virtually no in lieu of, or their in lieu of is tuition, which is minor, they will get a very large per pupil payment from the state. And some school districts, when you look at it, there were, I don't know how many there were this year, but 3 states last year, or excuse me, 3 school districts last year were entirely funded with local funds, and they received so much in lieu of that they received no state dollars because their in lieu of covered their entire state. So that district is covered 100% locally with no state dollars. So when this goes in, what happens if your in lieu of just goes, that's gone, and you have no state revenue because it says what you levied in 2024, and if there's no levy, then how do we work around that? And again, that's going to affect a lot of small school districts in a lot of rural areas.
And I know it sounds like we're wanting to move on a little bit here, but one of the things that I bring up a lot, I sit on the education committee during the regular legislative session, and obviously this measure, it's going to impact rural North Dakota more than the larger cities if Measure 4 passes. And one of the things that I always bring up is that energy and agriculture are the biggest industries in the state, and those typically take place in rural communities. And so I wish that story got told a little bit more when we talk about Measure 4.
So like with everyone else in the room, we're desperate for teachers, especially in rural America. And one of the things that we talk about is teacher recruitment and retention, and how do we attract those employees. We've gotten very creative in our areas, and the kicker with Measure 4 is it, again, holds us to that dollar amount. So where I start pay at $42,000 a year for a new teacher, Tioga is close to 60. So how do I then, as a district, come to you guys begging you for more money to recruit and retain these staff at a lower wage? How are you foreseeing this to be balanced in the future among all districts if this passes? That wasn't on.
He sits on appropriations, so.
And thank you for making me do the first one. The first thing that would have to happen, and let's go back a section, what we've tried really hard doing over the last 3 or 4 sessions in the legislature is turning control of your local school district back to your local boards and letting your local boards deal with all of that. So we haven't been involved. The only way that you can have the teachers in this school district making the same dollars as the teacher in this school district is that if it's on a state system and the state sets the wages for every school district. Either that, and to do that, we would have to pull back a lot of the freedoms that we've given the local school districts to deal with those things. And to be, well, I'll just say it, and good luck with ND United when you do that.
You want to follow up with that?
Well, I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. I'm somebody who believes that local control is the best form of government. And there are situations where, like you said, up in Tioga, they're making $60,000 a year as a teacher, and in Garrison, they're making $42,000 a year. I think if we give the state more control, there is probably going to be an effort to consolidate some of the smaller schools across the state. And that is not what is best for rural North Dakota. It's not best for the agriculture or the energy industry.
Perfect. You just led into another non-scripted question. Rural North Dakota, consolidating schools, okay? How do we get kids to school? Over half of my student population now comes by bus. And now if we start consolidating schools, I pride myself at keeping those kids on the bus no more than an hour if I can. And my furthest pickup is 42 miles away from the school. How then would we then envision this happening? And then on top of that, another piece of the pie that hasn't been talked about is the transportation cost from the state. We're getting roughly a fourth of what it costs us to bus kids from the state. There's no reference of this in any of this measure of how we make this up when our costs have nearly quadrupled in maintenance, fuel, and everything else.
Good question. You going first this time?
You can.
God, I have to go first all the time. To address the bus, so we will be proposing legislation to change how we fund the busing, because it is a very burdensome. Some school districts have incredibly large bus routes with a massive fleets, I guess. How else do you describe it? And with what's happening now in the market, how much you have to pay for a bus is skyrocketing. I don't want to get, so, and I forgot the rest of the question.
Well, just how do we account for that? Then if we're going to consolidate school, now we're going to be extending bus routes. And all of these other things are going to happen. And then you figure in bus drivers on top of it. Who's going to drive the bus?
Yeah, the only thing I can say, I guess, on that is that we have had discussions and are trying to figure out what can we do. How do you attract more people into driving the bus? There's been some federal regulations that have come out that are just, this isn't a swear word, it's a real word, are just asinine. And if they were put in place in North Dakota, there's no way we get bus drivers. So we're resisting some of those movements on that by some of those big, I guess, lobby groups that want it to go a certain way. How do you get that small town feel when you're so far away? I don't have the answer. I have no idea.
Yeah, and I actually have to kind of agree with that. I don't really have an answer for that either. One of the things that we did talk about with the school funding task force is that transportation piece of it. And we understand that not every mile is created equal. You know, when you are in Fargo or Bismarck and you're providing busing to the students, the miles in that bus are not the same as in a Hazen or even a Steele, you know, where they're driving on gravel roads, and it impacts the tires, it impacts the engine, everything with the bus, and so it can't be used as long. And I think that what we always need to come back to is what, and this is what we talk about in the education committee, what is best for the student. And I know that at a certain point, consolidation does sometimes need to happen. I grew up in Pick City, and I used to go to school in Riverdale, which was about 4 miles away. And when I was in 4th grade, going into 5th grade, they decided to close the high school, and then 2 years later they closed the rest of the school. And my parents were faced with the decision of sending us to Hazen or sending us to Underwood. And for whatever reason, because my dad worked at the Glen Herald mine and we did a lot of family in Hazen, they sent me to Hazen. But you know, that was 25 miles for me. And now Nick mentioned that he's got a student that lives, do you say 42?
Actually, I pick up 20 kids at that one stop.
Okay. Well, and they've kind of tried to streamline that a little bit for you. But we have a constitutional responsibility to educate every student, or to offer a public education to every student, K through 12 in North Dakota. And you have to look at that drive time as a piece of it. And at a certain point, you know, an hour and a half on the road for a 6 or 7-year-old boy is just, it's too far. It's too long.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears on you. Pam from Minot was just up speaking about career and tech ed. And that's something near and dear to my heart, is career and tech ed. I should have been a plumber, so I could sift through people's shit instead of dealing with their shit, but excuse my language. But with that being said, again, real perspective, we've invested millions of dollars now across the state in a variety of centers in bigger hub cities, as we'll call them. But what hasn't been referenced is the smaller school districts who have very limited access to some of these centers. Is there plans in the future to expand these opportunities for districts like mine to get more access to them?
I'll take this one first, sir. So I love that we have put a big effort into CTE centers across the state. Primarily, the focus so far has been on the larger cities, making sure that they have those there. From what I understand, there's probably going to be about $70 million in the ask for future CTE centers. And that could be, you know, of course they don't, in appropriations, they don't necessarily say that it's going to go towards this town and this town and this town, but you can kind of put an application for it and presentation. And so in the way that I see it is those funds should primarily be used to kind of fill in the gaps across the state. And I actually am hoping to bring a CTE center. So hope you're listening here in appropriations, a CTE center to the Hazen Beulah area, which would service the local communities. You know, I think the closest one to us right now is in Mandan, but that's over an hour away, and it's just not feasible for kids in Hazen and Beulah or Center to drive that far on a daily basis. And what I love about the CTE centers is that they're really geared towards the regional workforce. And so in some of the preliminary hearing or the preliminary meetings that we've been having in regards to the CTE center that I'd like to bring to our community, we've brought in Basin Electric, North American Coal, the healthcare systems, just to kind of see what their workforce needs are, because I feel like we've kind of come to the point where in rural North Dakota, the focus really needs to be on growing our own in terms of workforce. And we've seen a lot of success there, whether it comes to nursing. We have a 4-year education program at the Sakakawea Medical Center in Hazen. And also with education, we have a handful of teachers that have done their education online and are now working in our elementary schools.
Just a little background, when I was the Regional Education Association, we worked and got funding and built a CTE center on the campus at Williston State College. We also ran a virtual CTE center out of our RAA offices, and so I've been involved with Current Tech for quite a while. There's a couple of superintendents from the central part of the state, I guess. I had one guy one time tell me that Carrington was the center of North Dakota. So I guess I can say Stanley is in the center of North Dakota, right? If Carrington is, so is Stanley. So there's some superintendents from that part of the state that are really looking into the same thing Anna was talking about. How do we do it? I think to do CTE in small rural areas, you have to be creative, and it can't be, you have to be in the building to get the classes. There has to be virtual to it. There has to be simulators to it. There has to be equipment that moves from place to place. There has to be, you have to be creative in how you're going to do it. The big burden that we found is the bell schedule, because the bus routes dictate the bell schedule. And so it's really, there's got to be a lot of cooperation and collaboration between the school districts, between the centers, and creativity to try and get it done. And the one thing that we've learned over the last couple sessions legislatively is that legislatively we've done quite a bit to try and help fund CTE around the state, and it's really strong right now legislatively.
So, you know, in my world, my job consists of parents, buses, and then the last one is sports. So with that being said, I know the last session there were some bills out there regarding the North Dakota High School Activities Association, and right now there's been a big push, especially specific to certain fans and their behavior. Do you foresee there being any legislative impacts coinciding with fan behavior and how they can act within a school to help reassure us as administrators who get the pleasure of escorting these people out?
You're up, baby.
I believe that there probably will be legislation to address this, but I personally think that this should be handled locally.
And well, now I'm going to say I agree with her because you clapped.
Don't always agree with Beaver.
But I agree with that. Like I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot in the last several sessions to put more control back into the hands of the local school districts. And I think this is one of those things that's where it belongs, and if there's something that's blocking your school board from putting in a policy that's stronger, then if it's let us know and we can try to remove it from Century Code so that your school district has more ability to deal with that.
Hey Nick, I think they misunderstood this question. I think what you were asking is, can you be deputized?
Funny you say that, I already am.
I think just one thing that I'd like to add on this, in visiting with teachers and administrators across the state, they kind of dread the legislative session, and that's because it seems like every time we meet as a legislature, we take more control away from them, and we make them enforce more and more rules, and they have to go through additional training every session, and it takes away the teachers' and the administrators' ability to focus on the students.
Wow, you're just trying to appease me now, Anna. Okay, we're going to go with the last question. It should be an easy one, I promise. So I often hear the inmates get to eat for free. Why not the students?
All right, well, so last session, there was a bill that was introduced that did just this. And of course, we heard it in the Education Committee. And I believe that it came with a price tag of about $100 million. Does that sound accurate?
60.
How much was it?
I think it was $160
million. It's a huge price tag. But and I think a lot of the things that were brought up is, well, not everybody needs free meals. But the issue that isn't talked about that much is the fact that, yes, there's definitely a program out there for free and reduced school lunches or meals. I'm sure it probably affects breakfast as well, right?
Yep.
But the problem is that most of the parents that are eligible for this don't even bother turning in the paperwork. And so, and it makes the ability of teachers, it makes their job a lot harder when they've got kids that are hungry. And so I guess I have to see the bill language, but free and reduced meals free meals for all students is probably something that I would likely support. And I think we could probably fund it by getting rid of some of the pet projects.
One of the saddest things I saw, I was doing a classroom visitation in elementary school last spring, second graders, and it was in the afternoon, and it was snack time, and some of the kids had snacks, and some of them didn't have snacks. And that was like, my gosh, how can we do that? From all the studies and everything that I've read, breakfast makes the morning go a lot easier and a lot smoother in the school. Lunch makes the afternoon go a lot smoother in the school, because a lot of the times kids are acting up simply basically because they're hungry. That being said, I will agree with Anna that there are some parents that want to pay for their lunch, and there are some that can't. And we need to find the fine line between that. I think what we did this last session, by bumping up the poverty rate to make those kids eligible, I think once you get over into western North Dakota, it didn't make any difference because it didn't bump it up high enough to qualify a lot more people. So if we're going to make some kind of change to it or provision, we have to make sure that it gets up there high enough that kids who live in areas where it's very expensive to live qualify for it. And I will share one more thing. This is, take it for what it's worth. At a teacher with a master's degree and 15 years of teaching thanked me for voting yes on bumping up the lunch because he can't afford to pay for lunch for his kids. And I'm thinking, oh, you got a master's degree in 15 years and you're not making, your wage is not enough to help you provide lunch. And so there's a lot of issues, I think. I don't know if we can address them all, but there are things that we can do that I agree we should do to make lunch and breakfast and snacks available for kids.
Well, for the sake of time, I'm being told I need to shut up. Thank you, panelists, for joining us. I know I didn't pick on you much, Brent, but thank you again. Give them a round of applause.